la famille.
Well, good evening. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, really excited to be here. I'm gonna talk about a topic which, has been part of my mind for quite a long time, and I've been, very fortunate to live through it. The last years. Your basically evolution of your role as a founder. I hope you're gonna enjoy it, and happy to answer questions in the end. Just really quick, who am I? What am I doing? Actually, I started a company called Fyber in April 2009. After actually having started 2 companies during my studies, which both failed. So I've seen the good and the bads, and been here for 10 years in Berlin. It's amazing to see all of you and many more entrepreneurs coming to the city, because when I started was like really, really early. We scaled Fyber. I've been, basically co-founding Fyber and scaled the company for 8.5 years. So I spent quite a long time there in various different roles, had many different titles, many different functions. I'll speak a little bit more about that. We sold the company for 150 million to a public company, which we then managed for 2.5 years. I think when I left, we were around 350 people, and I left in March last year, which also helped me have a really relaxed year compared to the 8 years before. I've been also actively investing in companies, also having some board seats in various different companies. Some of you might know, so I've seen some companies from the outside, and I think there's certain patterns you can observe again and again. And I'll try to speak about this a little bit more abstract today. I joined Point 9. I've been working with Pavel actually back at Team Europe times, and I'm a big fan. I think it's a really good VC fund, and I'm working there as a venture partner, so it's kind of a free radical. Looking at companies, and we invest seed stage in interesting companies. Last but not least, I've been on a mission to essentially build great technology companies. And also when doing the talk, I realized and to learn things by doing things. Meaning I think that when I was 23 and I had to make a choice, do I do a master, or do I just do what I actually want to do, start a company? Well, I think it's probably you learn more when you start a company, even if you fail. So I decided to do that, and I think the same with my role at Point 9. I want to learn how does a VC look like, and I think you learn differently, right? You read and you actively do it, and I think it's a really nice way of learning. And I think learning is actually a big topic of being an entrepreneur. It's maybe one of the most important skills to actually run a company, because there's so much uncertainty. So about the actual topic, and what's the role of a founder, and how does it evolve? I think sometimes when you read the media about founders like Mark Zuckerberg, or Elon Musk, or Steve Jobs, they sound like superheroes. And not just one superhero, but all the superheroes together. They have all these amazing skills. They can see the future. They're amazing at execution, and they hire the best people. They raise enormous amount of money, and I think that's a really strange picture of an entrepreneur. And I think I think the reality is it's much more complicated, and it looks a little bit more like this. I think the reality is as the likelihood of success for a company you start is super low, right? And still you go and you do it because you have a strong conviction that actually you solve a problem which the world needs to be solved. And you have this dream that you can maybe solve that problem better than the big incumbents. And I think the uncertainty as a founder is really high, And so I think the question is really like, what makes Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, as to take 3 examples? I think there are many more, outstanding founders, because there's no question that these guys are outstanding founders. They are once in a lifetime founders. So what are the traits, and what's their role, and what makes them so successful? Yeah, I think when you look at the role as a founder, and I'll tell you a little bit about my personal experience at Fyber, but when you look at it, I think that often you have topics like am I focused on short term, yeah, or am I focused on my long term strategy? And I think the answer most of the times is both. Yeah, when you look at topics like am I focused on building the best organization, attracting the best people, making sure that it all runs smoothly and great, yeah, which most of the cases is not the case. It's always a little bit more chaotic and challenging. But are you focus? Do I focus on customers and go out and sell and stuff like that, right? I think also the answer is most of the times you do both, to succeed. Yeah. And the same is with delegation versus operations, and I think the same is with vision versus reality. I mean, do you just live in the future and think this is where we were gonna be, yeah, and try to share that vision with your team, or do you focus on what is actually the reality? What is the data we can look at, and what does it say, and how do I react to it, and what does it mean for maybe tomorrow or the day after, but not the 3 to 5 year vision. Yeah, I think again the answer is both. Yeah, and so I think first the role as a founder is a paradox. Yeah, because you switch between many different roles all the time, and I think if you accept that, then you're much better off than trying to always do the one or the other thing. And I think it changes. Yeah? So I think the role as a founder changes, and it changes especially in context of time, yeah, and size of the organization. And some of you might know this drawing by Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator. I think it's really interesting because it describes the different stages you go through as a founder, and I'll try to give you some insights about like our story when we started the company. So you have to imagine we started Fyber in April 2009. It was midst of financial crisis. I think there were 2 or 3 more or less successful companies here in Berlin before. It was just super different ecosystem to today's ecosystem, I would say. And so of course, I mean, the first thing you have to do as a founder is you have to find an idea or a problem which you want to solve, and you need a strong conviction that it's actually worth spending your next 5 to 10 or 20 years on solving this. Yeah. Better not think too deep about it, because you'll always find things which tell you don't do it. Yeah. Be a little bit naive about it, but at the same time, I mean, to succeed, you obviously want to make sure that you have a strong conviction about it, right? So you wouldn't do it if you have excitement and passion for it, right? You're really excited about it. You build your first product, and I think we launched after 3 or 4 months, our first version of the product, and I mean, everything went wrong, right? Like CTO was on holiday. It was a Friday. The whole product didn't work, and and you think as a founder, right? Like that's it. We're done. Let's stop the project. It was really nice. So you jump over the first hoop, and you realize, yeah. Oh, it's really challenging. And then you go on and you win your first, second, third customer. And in our case, we realized that back in the days we were actually helping browser-based games to monetize their non-paying users through ads. And we realized that there was a huge amount of fraud in the ecosystem. And so I think our first really large customer called us, making actually I think 80K in the 3rd month. Yeah, and I mean, you can imagine, right? Like you launch a product, you don't know whether it's working, and then you make 80K with one customer in the third month. That's actually a really good sign. And then, called us end of the month and said, well, actually, 80% of that is fraud, and we won't pay you for that. And again, you're like, shit, how could this happen? So you learn, you try to prevent it in the future, and so and then from there we went really through different challenges, and we essentially had two main things which were really challenging. I mean, first, we help Facebook apps to monetize their users, and Facebook introduced something like Facebook credits. It was a really well-known virtual currency, not a cryptocurrency though, and it basically questioned everything we did, right? But at that point, we were already 80 people doing I think 2.5 million in revenues per month. The business was actually working really well, yeah. And you get really questions like you knew that what we were doing at that point wouldn't be for the long term. So we essentially pivoted to mobile, and that was the first big change in the organization. And I think the key learning there was like the first startup phase. Most of my role was to actually make it work, yeah. To make work, that you attract great people who then essentially, you build your teams and actually, make sales work, make operations work, development, product, and essentially build these teams and empower them to be successful. Yeah? And then what I realized is, okay, this is like such a fundamental threat to the company, and it's not that that nobody saw it, but it's really difficult to find people to stand up and say, hey, by the way, if we continue this, we're gonna die in 3 years. How about we change? Yeah. So I think what I want to say is like your role as a founder is also to reflect the status quo and think about is this actually a long-term thing, or is it just one step to a longer-term thing? Yeah. And then the second big thing was, we pivoted to mobile. Business on web was going down, and our mobile business was growing really, really fast. And again, like during a long summer, I looked at the business and thought, shit, like that's not a long-term defendable business. And then we proactively pivoted to become like a SaaS-enabled marketplace for apps to essentially integrate, manage, and optimize all your different ad revenue vendors via a single SDK. Yeah, and again, we had to change a lot. And I think when you look at this, there's a pattern. Yeah, I think the pattern is very much what in S-curves, and you've probably seen this. Basically, you have I think 3 main phases of a company, and some companies have the fortune of having multiple products which have these phases. Yeah. I think Amazon is a great example of this, really starting with retail and then, building AWS. And I think now they're going to disrupt logistics and other parts of, industries. I think Google is a great example. Facebook is a great example. And, I think in the startup phase, your role as a founder is significantly different to the scale-up phase and to the maturity phase, or what you could call the innovation phase, the re-innovation phase. So, in the startup phase, what do you do as a founder? Yeah. I mean, you come up with an idea. You actually make a pretty big decision early on, which most people don't think that much about. Is it the right timing for this idea? And also, is it the right place to start the idea? Yeah. We never questioned that. We were in Berlin. Of course, we start the company in Berlin. Yeah. I think, if you're a really good founder, you think about, is this the right place to start the company? Yeah. And then, I mean, you build your MVP, and you try to achieve product market fit. And you try to validate that the kind of idea you had is actually true, yeah, that it actually solves a problem. And of course, I mean, you try to find co-founders, yeah, and you do first hires, and these are extremely important decisions, yeah, extremely important decisions, and it's really hard to outsource or to delegate finding a co-founder, yeah, but it's a really really important decision. So like. And also the first hires are extremely important. Everybody will say that. And then you essentially build your initial networks. Yeah, you win your first 10 customers, or you have your first 100 to 1,000 users, and you essentially win your first little funding round. Yeah, and get people and money and capital formatted to essentially help you do what you do. Yeah. And I think that also in the first phase, you actually set a really really important milestone of culture. Yeah, and most people, I mean, culture is something which is always there, and and most people don't even know how to develop it, right? And I think it's fairly difficult, but I think it's really really crucial to think about how do you do this early on. How do you make sure that the first hires you do are the right people in the culture you want to create, have the right mindset, and how do you make it explicit early on? Yeah, I think the founder of eShares now, Carter, has written a really cool manual about making culture explicit early on, like your values, your behavior, how do you want to work together, how do you want to hire, fire, promote people. So I think this is really the first phase, yeah. And I think great founders think about these things very very rationally and make the right choices. And this is tough. I mean, how many founders do you know? They just live in Berlin, they happen to have a good idea. Do they really question whether this is the right place to start the company? Yeah, we didn't do it. Yeah, we're just running, and so I think this is like the first phase, and then the second scale up phase. I think it's all about people. Yeah, people. Who do you hire? Who do you fire? Who do you promote? Yeah, how do you build an amazing team? Yeah. How do you, when a company grows from 10 people to 300, 500, 5,000 people, how do you make sure that you don't lose that edge, that excitement in the people? How do you make sure that you really see a consistent behavior you want to see? Yeah, which essentially reproduces your culture. So I think this is really something spending a lot of time on, makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And then it's I think to me it's a lot about the organization. How do you organize? And there's many different ways how you can organize, yeah. And also questioning, is that the right way to organize the company at the right stage? Yeah, because obviously scale up is you go through many different stages. Yeah, and I mean if you take an Amazon. Just with the first S curve, I mean, they've scaled to over 100,000 people, right? So, like, how do you do this successfully? That's super challenging, and it's very much about the business model in that phase. Yeah, it's very much about making sure that your unit economics work, that your CAC, your ARPU, or whatever you look at, yeah, is actually working out. Yeah. And most of your Series A investors will ask you the question, okay, like, that's great, you've proven your model, everything looks really interesting. So, how do you scale this now from, 5 or 10 million to 100 million to 500 million in revenues? Yeah. So figuring that out, I think, is super crucial. And I think what it also means is like figuring out what are your competitive modes, like what are your competitive differentiators, which really make you win against all the others out there. Yeah? And of course, developing networks, whether that's network effects, or like you develop basically your company networks which help support you, funding, customers, all these things. Yeah. And then I think the third phase is actually the one which is super challenging. We never got into that phase. We never reproduced that innovation cycle to essentially organically build a second or third product which really worked. We bought ourselves into that. We did 3 acquisitions, during the time when we basically were part of RNTS and running RNTS, now Fyber NV. And we bought 3 companies to essentially do that. I think that's a way how you can do it. And I think some companies have done that successfully. I think when you look at Facebook, it's a great example. Without Instagram, without WhatsApp, what would Facebook be today? Probably not as strong as without it. And making that decision and understanding this, I think is super crucial. And I think all the amazing companies you see are companies which reproduce second, third, fourth, fifth S-curves. I think it's fundamentally this is a model I really like, and it's a professor I studied with at University of Wittenherdecke, which is essentially very deep in system theory, which I think is really interesting theory. I won't bore you with a lot of stuff about this, but it's trying to explain how a firm works. And I think what to me the role of a founder is essentially focusing on where do you have highest impact to make your firm more successful in the context of the given time, and in context of where your company is. And of course, I mean, there's many different answers to this, but I think like fundamentally it boils down to that. And so to essentially close my talk, I don't even know how long I spoke. I thought about, okay, what were the 4 things I focused on again and again throughout these different phases. And to me, these were people. Bring the best people on board and empowering them, making them successful, really giving them, the freedom to run their roles. And I think this goes from co-founders, first hires, to experts and leaders. In the different phases. And that is really, really difficult. So I think one message is, okay, as a founder you have to learn fast, and if you learn, then learn how to hire, evaluate, empower people, because that's really, I think, one of the most important skills as a founder. And then secondly, I think it's very much about product. So you dream to MVP, to product market fit, to actually, scale in excellence. Because I mean, when you look at some of the early Zynga games or the early version of Google or what have you, right? Like all these different products, they changed a lot and they all become amazing. But usually in the beginning they're not amazing. And so that's okay. I mean, I think one of our investors literally quoted 1 month after our launch, "This is the worst product I've ever seen." It was actually my job back in the days. So thanks, very motivating. But so I think product for me is something holistic, right? It includes the technology, it includes your customers, and of course you want to make sure that you build an amazing product. And then the one I struggled probably the most with is strategy. You start up, I mean, you have this one thing and you think that's gonna solve it, and sometimes you figure out it's not, and then you're pivoting. But you lay a lot of groundwork, and I've seen very few companies pivot from being an e-commerce company to a AI company. So there's some path dependency always, um, and so I think it's basically what I talked about earlier. But how do you create an organization which reproduces this again and again without you, the founder, doing it or pushing it, or And I mean, I remember when I came, back. I spent a lot of time in San Francisco, and I came back, and we were around 150 people, and we had a management team, and I sat down and said, guys, I thought about it long and hard, and if we don't change, we're gonna die. Yeah, it's gonna be a slow death. It's gonna take 5 to 10 years, but we're gonna die, and we won't matter. Yeah, we really have to change, and then to actually rally a company of 150 people around this and change is really, really difficult. Yeah. So I failed completely to reproduce that in the organization, to empower people to actually stand up and say, hey, we have to change. We really need to do something different. I think it's also part of your role as a founder to do that, but it's really challenging. I don't have a good answer to it, but I think it's part of that job description. And then last but not least, culture, and culture means a lot of things to a lot of different people, which I think means it's fairly complex. Yeah, input-output function doesn't necessarily always work, but I think a very wise man on culture, the former COO of Zendesk and Duo Security, both very successful businesses, said at a Point 9 summit, culture is the set of values and behaviors you do basically explicitly write down in an organization, and you make hiring, firing, and promotion decisions based on that, because it reproduces your culture. And I think that resonated really well with me. And to do this consistently is really tough. Yeah, to say, okay, well, actually that behavior is really against our culture, and now I have to basically proactively go and potentially also make a hard decision. Yeah, it is really, really tough. So and I think doing this early on and instilling it is really crucial. And as a founder, again, there's various different ways of how you can create a culture, and but I think that this is a big part of what you do as a founder to essentially create that culture. Think about how to reproduce your culture, and you see, the bigger the company gets, the harder it becomes to just change it. Yeah, it's really difficult, because it is essentially living in the organism of an organization, and it's reproduced by the people you hire and who are on board with the company. Yeah. So that's already it. I hope you have a couple of tough questions, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. First question regarding the culture. The second point that you have jotted down is consistent behavior. Once you have explicitly written down and communicating about the values and the culture, what action did you take to try to make this value lived by the people that you have inside, the new hires and the people that you already have hired?
Yeah. Okay, am I supposed to repeat that? No.
No, that's
okay.
fine.
All right. Yeah, I think I mean, this is a great question. So I think I mean, when I started the company, I was 24. I had no clue about all of this, right? So I think now would have done probably many things different. I think what we did very well in the beginning, we hired amazing people. Yeah, probably the best thing which happened to us was the financial crisis in terms of talent availability. Yeah, which is very different today. It's probably much harder to find that type of talent. And what we looked for was always people who basically put the company first. And I think when you hire people, always hire for, and I think everybody will say that, but it's difficult to do, hire for talent versus experience. And try to find, you know, you all, you know, have different experience, right? And try to find, you know, this is the role I need to fill, and, you know, this is the person I have, and, you know, every person has its own way of wanting to grow themselves and learn and grow their career. So is there actually a match of, you know, this is the role and this is what I actually want to do outside of, you know, this company or that company or that company? And if you find a good match and, you know, basically smart people, and then you help them to be really successful, I think it goes a long way. Yeah. I think, you know, as a founder, we had a rule early on to interview, you know, always have one founder interview the person. Yeah. We spent quite some time on, you know, trying to really do a good recruiting process, find the right people, do reference calls, you know. So I think we invested a lot in, you know, the people coming on board, and also thinking about, you know, who do we have to let go because of, you know, not always culture. Yeah, it might be also performance, might be mindset, might be different things. And we actively managed that. I think that's something we did well. What we didn't do well is we didn't explicitly thought about what are actually our core fundamental values and, you know, behaviors we would like, we envision. Yeah? I think we did that too late. And also at some point, we should have probably, you know, stayed in the interview process a little bit longer, which is, I mean, essentially a way of saying, you know, you didn't, you know, manage to already, you know, delegate this, and it's very important to delegate it and not having the founders do it. But, you know, we struggled for quite a while to actually hire people with a lot of experience. And that was really challenging for us. So now I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah, I hope some parts of it.
Very good, very good. I was asking you a question because back in my experience, I spent 3 years in a corporate in management consulting, a big company, one of the big four. I don't want to give the name. They had explicitly 6 points defining the culture.
Yeah,
it was not lived at all.
It
was not lived within the company.
Yeah,
they was promoting managing people totally different way.
Yeah.
No stewardship, no what you want. So that's the reason why only writing on bullet points and defining each of the points of what should be your culture is sometimes not enough.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's about the behavior of everybody, and actually like trying to find consistency in that, yeah, and then making decisions based on that. Nevertheless, if you don't write it down, if you don't share it, if you don't, you know, make explicit examples of it. I mean, I know some founders, if they fire somebody in a small company, they explain why, and they refer to it about culture, yeah. And like I think, you know, you can have all different kind of tools to do it, yeah. But if you don't communicate about it, if you don't make it a point again and again, and also if you don't reflect on it, right? Like I think it's very poisonous if you write something down and it's not at all lived, yeah. But I think then it's already almost too late, and it's really hard to change, yeah. But the good thing as a founder is you basically do it from early on, right? So like you can basically, you have to make sure that you don't compromise on that early on. I think it's really tough. I think it's one of the really challenging things, and I think the great companies have done it. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Janis.
Yeah, thanks so much for the talk. I have a simple question. To whom did you communicate the vision? It was the key players, or it was the whole team, especially when the startup grew to a lot of people. How did you communicate the vision and make sure that everyone gets it and everyone follows that same vision that you have?
Also a really good question. I think it took a long time for us to actually create that vision. And we had lots of, discussions about it. It wasn't that we, wanted to have a vision, but we just solved the problem really well, and it worked really well. But it was really challenging for us to actually say, this is, I don't know, like this is the 10, 20 years vision. Yeah, I think we grew into that. And the second pivot I mentioned, yeah, it's a little bit out of context, so it's maybe hard to understand. But the second pivot we did proactively because we saw a problem for all the app developers out there, and there are many. Yeah, how do I monetize my users? Yeah, and we basically tried to solve that problem. And then we started to develop a vision, and then we communicated to everybody, and tried to make it very explicit. Yeah. And I think the bigger the company gets, the more your role as a founder moves from one-on-one and one-to-many to one-to-all communication, and the more you have to think about your communications channels, your structure of the organization, and the ways that people actually can sign up for the vision with one North Star metric or what have you, right? But for us, it took quite a while. I would say almost like 4 years. Yeah. So again, something we learned into. Yeah. Yeah.
Follow-up question: how and when did you find your co-founders, especially where the vision was not completely clear at the beginning?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good question. I was actually part of a company called Team Europe Ventures, and it's basically an incubator behind a bunch of companies, and we talked to a bunch of people, and then we talked to essentially. Jan and I, back in the days, were both at Team Europe. We started the company, and then we basically operationally run it. And we have been in discussions with Andreas for a long time. And he wanted to start a company, and then we found Andreas, and then we found Marcus, which was becoming our CTO, which I see also as a co-founder. And Andreas, Marcus, and I basically run the company from then on until we sold it. And Jan left it after. I think a year or so, but maybe just to follow up on the. So I think when founding a co-founder, I think one thing you should look at, and we were really lucky that this worked out, is like, and everybody would say that, but like I think it's true. Like obviously what does a company need to be successful? What kind of roles and functions? And then, can you actually imagine to work with that person for 5 to 10 years? And if you have, and that is not an easy thing to answer, but if you have a bad feeling in your stomach, listen to it. Don't compromise on it. It's really, really important. I think sometimes certain decisions. I mean, we always try to look at data, but sometimes just listen to your stomach.
Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Lydia. Since I traveled 1,000 kilometers from London to Berlin, do you mind if I ask 3 questions? First one, you mentioned learning skill is really key for a founder. Do you mean learning through working in startups or organizations, or do you mean could be self-taught? Shall I ask the rest too, or later?
Maybe we go back and forth.
Okay.
I think. Look, I think most people who start a company have not yet experienced all of what's ahead of them. Obviously, your role changes in context of size of organization, so there's different type of things you have to learn. Yeah. I mean, I think there's many ways how you can learn, and different people learn in different ways, but I think like you don't really have the time to read all the books. So most of the time is a combination of reading, talking to people, and just basically trying it out and trying to reflect on what are the things which didn't work well, and then do them. After 6 years, for example, I started working with a coach. Until that, I was totally against working with a coach and couldn't imagine doing it. I think it was a tremendous learning experience. I had to learn how to speak in front of a lot of people, which I totally not enjoy. I just don't like it, and it sounds maybe strange, but it's true. Yeah, and so you have to learn it, right? So like it's a little bit like when you think what is needed for your role to make the company more successful. Yeah, you'll learn it. Yeah, and you'll learn it in different ways. And I mean, some people go to courses, and other people get coaches. Other people read books. I think that it depends on you. Yeah.
Thank you. The second question: if my role is in business, not a technical founder, what would you suggest to be the ideal functions or role at a tech startup?
Business role?
Oh yes.
No,
So, do you think it's a big limitation not being able to?
I don't have a computer science background. I think it's I think that's what I try to say with the talk a little bit. Like, I think there's nobody who will cover all the fields, and that's also not needed. Yeah, what is needed is to find people who are amazing and to gather them around you, and including investors, and help you succeed on your vision and mission. That doesn't mean, like, often you don't have the luxury that you don't have to do things, right? So, for example, I spent 2 years selling a lot. I went out, sold a lot. I spent a lot of time working on product. So like these were things I had to learn. Am I the best product manager? Definitely not. Am I the best salesperson? Definitely not. Am I good at anything at excellent value? Probably not at all. Yeah, that's okay, as long as you find people who are better. Yeah, always hire people who are better than you at what you want to do. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Lastly, could you tell me more the difference between Berlin, London, San Francisco in the startup ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, I don't know London that well, so I can't speak to that. I spent a lot of time in San Francisco. I think I counted like 48 flights throughout the years. Yeah, how is it different? I mean, San Francisco is just a super mature ecosystem in terms of talent, VC, and like sheer size of the ecosystem. It's super fast. Yeah, I mean, it's super fast to go to 10 VCs. You can do it basically within a week. Yeah. In Europe, I mean, some VCs are in Berlin, some are in London, some are in Paris. Yeah, and so it just I think the speed and the sense of urgency is higher. Maybe even higher in China now. And other than that, I think you can found great companies everywhere. There's certain models which you can only found in San Francisco, I think, and there's certain models which you should not found in San Francisco. Yeah. Yeah, but I think this is probably a very short, not very sophisticated answer. I think could answer that much longer, but I think these were like some of the difference. Yeah.
Okay, take it. Hi, thanks a lot for the talk. Yeah, my question has to do more with like the company's been around for quite some time, and I'm just interested in when you started and to where you are now, or how the company is now. Like, how did the organizational structure change? Like, was it kind of more holocratic in the beginning because you're a small team, and did you form more hierarchy as you grew bigger? Like, how did that work? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I could spend actually hours talking about it. Yeah, so I mean, I think there's 2 people from Fyber here, so you can talk to them. But I think what we told most people coming into the company was always like, change is the only constant. So like we will be changing a lot, and that also meant changing the organizational structure. But yeah, like how we were organized, I think we organized in different manners in different times. But I think we were probably what you would call like a traditional organizational model. Yeah. So and I think that there is many ways how you can organize a company. You just have to do it really well. What I mean with that is, you have to make sure that their salary bands, that you have consistent titles, that I mean, if you need titles, that you put the right people in the right positions, you enable them, you empower them with the right tools and metrics, but you also manage them well, and I think so I think we spend a lot of time on that, but to give you an example, when we launched our mobile business, right? So we were around 80, 100 people growing our web business, and Facebook Credit came and became mandatory, and a Silicon Valley-based company won the deal with Facebook to be directly integrated into Facebook, and it was clear to us that 50% of our business is going to go away within 1 year. We knew that if we now would just basically put 80 to 100 people on mobile, it wouldn't work. So we just basically created a new team, which was essentially a founding team of the mobile initiative. One product manager, one engineer, one person we brought on from external, a friend, and we basically started running that in parallel to the existing organization. We changed our engineering organization many times in various different ways, and I think it's really hard to know when it's like sometimes people say, oh, there's not a sense of ownership, or there's something is not really working that smoothly, or something that's and then you I think it's really important to then think about, okay, is this maybe because of organizational structure? Is maybe because we have too large teams, too small teams? Is this maybe because there is certain team doesn't exist? If I look back now, it felt a little bit like what I did most of the time was actually building teams and then letting them run. That was literally most of the time I spent in the first 5 years. Just building teams, letting them run, building teams. Most of the time I did it myself, then recruited somebody into it to understand who actually do I actually need, how do I actually solve this. Because I mean you have to figure out, are you hunting whales or deers, or do you have an outbound or inbound sales model, or so all sorts of things, right, which you don't know in the beginning, and you don't know what's the best model. I mean, you don't know what is the best customer acquisition strategy, and so you have to learn it, and the way we did it was mostly trying it out, learning it, understanding it, and then trying to bring people into that position and building these teams. So I mean, when we started, for example, from one day to the other, we were public. We never run a public company before. Okay, so what do you do? I mean, it's not that Andreas or me will become a CFO of a public company. It's just unrealistic. So we, try to find CFO. Then we started doing acquisitions. I mean, we've never done acquisitions before. So also really hard to delegate, actually. But you don't need a huge team for it. So, we brought on board a general counsel and stuff like that. So I think that was a lot happening. But in terms of organization structure, we changed the structure quite a bit, and we tried to take the fear for people, because org changes are always, stressful. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I think we became pretty good at that. And people knew that we didn't do it for, cost-cutting purposes. We just said, hey, it's not working as well as we think it would work that way, and tested it and then iterated on it.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully I can grab you later and speak more about it.
Yeah. It's a big topic.
I like the superheroes and the bit of abstract expressionism. Superheroes are very lucky. Usually something has transformed them completely by chance. And the apparent chaos in abstract expressionism is highly, highly structured. It's all about emergence. What's your relationship with emergence and luck, and how do you use that in running your businesses? And can I throw in another one?
Yeah, please.
Right.
Are you ask a counter question?
Okay. Are you? What's your next S curve?
Yeah. Okay, so can you specify the first question?
When you're thinking about a project, when you're thinking about your business, when you're thinking about a task, something that you're working on, are you waiting for something special and to come along and to change things, or are you just focusing on making that big messy painting in the way that you know how to do it?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think it's not sure if I'm able to answer it well. Let me try. I think that when you look at this this picture, right? I mean, firm is also in context of society. It's in context of a philosophy, in an economy. I think that the reality is a firm lives, and a startup especially, in context of high uncertainty, of things you can simply not influence. And so I think the most important role as a founder is to accept that and focus on the stuff you can influence, and do that where you think you have the biggest impact. But luck always plays a role. It can be a positive or negative luck, I think, but that is something you cannot really influence. I think that's, to me, the great founder minds are accepting that and basically going with it, and then trying to focus on, what you can influence. And I'm not sure if that answers your question, actually. But yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it's your answer, and that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, I when I saw the Pollock painting, and when I heard you talking about Zuckerberg and all those guys, I thought of Miles Davis.
Mm-hmm.
I find the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah.
So the more that you put into something,
yeah,
the bigger the range of possibilities that you have.
Yeah.
And then something will come along. So if you put yourself in a position of starting a company in Berlin in 2008, you just happen to have access to like a wider pool of talent than you would have done if you'd done it, say, like a year earlier, or maybe like a year later.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's actually a really nice answer to your question.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
And
lucky.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's I know people who basically say, look, I mean, I'm really excited about blockchain. I don't know anything about it. I know it's going to be big. I just want to be, dive into it. And they dive into it, and of course, you won't become a successful blockchain or AR or VR entrepreneur if you don't dive in, right? So like for sure you have to go that way. And for me, it was a little bit more abstract. I look at founding companies more like, there's certain things which every company has a lot of similarities, and I wanted to learn about that. That was my personal motivation. How do I become a great founder, like a complete founder? And I think I'm not done at all. Yeah, I think it's maybe not even like 10% or so, and I think it's just of course you definitely not learn how to become a successful founder by reading books. Yeah, it's just not happening. You have to do it, and so just do it. Yeah, I mean, and then hopefully something good comes out. Second question. What am I? What's my next S curve? Thinking about that right now.
How often you did unpopular decisions in the company, and kind of 2 in 1? And do you think it's important for the founder to be liked by employees? Like so employees really like your personality.
I think it's always more fun to be liked than not liked. It helps the vibe. I think there's examples for successful founders which are very much disliked, and the opposite, and both successful for being very successful and not successful. Again, I don't think that the founder itself is it's not your role to be liked. Yeah, it's the role to build a great company. Yeah. I think there's examples where founders have been extremely successful by fear, yeah, which I don't like at all. It's not my model. Yeah. I also don't think it's necessarily a sustainable model. And there's other founders, but I think the core thing is, I think it's maybe not the right question to ask. Yeah, I think the right question to ask is, again, if you think about this role being paradox, I mean, of course, if you lay off people, which, I mean, happens almost in every business, yeah? I mean, people won't cheer and say, hey, that's great. I think it's a question how you do it, yeah? I mean, you can do it in a really awful way and in a really, the best way possible, but it might be part of your job description at some point in time, yeah? And if you can avoid it, try to avoid it, but it just, or if you fire somebody, I mean, it's part of what you have to do to run a company, and it's really I mean, I think it's a question how you think about it, right? Like for us, firing someone was always, our fault. We didn't do a good decision in selecting, and then we didn't do a good decision in, if they, went through the probation period, in actually, either empowering that person, onboarding the person, or, so, I think this is just, an example for that. Yeah.
Maybe last question over here.
Hi, I have kind of a meta question. So these kind of advices that people are important, culture is important, they're obviously good advice, and obviously you understood it kind of intuitively, but do you think now that you worked with a lot of new startups, that kind of advice can be absorbed if you don't intuitively understand it? I mean, is the advice valuable to somebody that doesn't see it, or does a person who doesn't understand it just have to be burned in this situation to understand it?
It's very hard to give good founders, founders advice, yeah. But no, I mean, I think, look, I think a lot has been written about these topics, and I think the ecosystem and the founders are probably, often more mature now than maybe 10 years ago, because there's just much more knowledge about, how to run a successful company. There's people sharing this knowledge. And I think it's essentially, I think that's great by itself. But yeah, of course, this is very abstract advice, right? But yeah, I think you can tremendously help to avoid problems if you then dive 1 or 2 degrees deeper. Yeah, like what I gave some examples in recruiting. Yeah, but this is, this is probably not the topic today, but in all these topics, I mean, there could be 20 talks about culture here. There could be 20 talks about hiring and, building an organization and all these things, right? So I think it's very much about diving 2, 3, 4 degrees deeper into the detailed level and finding the way you want to do it. Yeah. But I think that maybe would have, eaten up the 20 minutes I had.
Thanks a lot, Janis.
Thank you.
Que la famille.